Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the latest webinar from Medicus IT. You are here for today, Seeing Through the Clouds. Don't miss the next technology migration. So this webinar is going to be all about how the healthcare landscape is constantly being transformed by technology. And with the introduction of cloud solutions, it really had a huge impact on overall patient experience. With patient data security and protection a concern, but also a big priority, cloud providers allow EHRs and operational workflows to function seamlessly while practices and CHCs operate more efficiently. But the benefits for healthcare organizations that transition to the cloud are, while they're great, it's important to know, is your facility on pace with the next technology migration? What is it going to be? Are you confused, and do you know where to begin? So there's so many options with cloud providers today. Taking the first step can be intimidating, but working with an experienced partner like Medicus IT enables you to leverage the benefits of cloud migration without running into unexpected difficulties. So before I introduce the speakers, I would love to get a quick poll out for everyone. So here it is. Should have popped up on your screen here. This is anonymous, so please answer. Do you utilize the cloud as part of your strategy? Yes, no, you're working on it, or I'm not sure. And again, this is anonymous, so you can be truthful, and it'll help our speakers know where everyone's at today. Number two, how did you find out about this webinar? Let us know, and you can click more than one. It's really helpful for us so we know how we can best communicate this for our next webinar and part of our Evolve series. And last but not least, who are you? What is your occupation? Are you on the operational side of practice management? Are you on the technology side? Are you a physician? Or do you not fit any of these categories? And maybe you are some even better category that we need to list next time. So just give you guys a few more seconds here. All right, let's end this, and I will share the results so our speaker can see. So most of you said, yes, you are utilizing the cloud or you're working on it. So that's great. I'm glad you are all here. A couple of you said no, but hopefully we can change that today. How did you find out about this webinar? So some of you are back and you've attended a previous one. Thank you and welcome back. And most of you are on the practice management side or on the other side. Those of you that clicked other, maybe you could ping me in the chat. I'd love to hear what your titles are. So with no further ado, let's move into introducing our amazing speakers. So first up, we have Jim. Welcome, Jim. Thank you so much for joining us today. Jim is the CTO at Spectrum Medical Partners. With an MBA in information technology, he has over 20 years of experience as a healthcare information technology executive. Jim has held numerous leadership positions over the course of his career, where he has applied his expert knowledge of everything from technology planning, operations, revenue cycle management, and strategy implementation. And he has really had the ability to engage and influence multidisciplinary teams at all levels. Spectrum Medical Partners is a healthcare leader committed to achieving the highest level of performance in patient care delivery. Next up, we are happy to welcome Dave Patel. And Dave is the Chief Innovation Officer at Medicus IT. As our CIO, he utilizes his 24+ years of IT experience in the healthcare environment to create innovative experiences and improvements to our processes. He brings expertise in network system design, cloud computing, EHR hosting, data visualization, customer service, and a number of other applications. And his purpose statement, which I love, is be a student on a journey, seeking, serving, and solving problems to maximize your impact. I think that's a great mantra. So thank you, Dave. And then last but definitely not least, we are happy to have Tim back. And Tim is our Chief Revenue Officer at Medicus IT that we are very lucky to have. He is a perennial entrepreneur, innovator, and adventurer. He's been a business owner for well over 2 decades. And before joining Medicus, he ran the IT services firm Atreon, which is 160 million, 260 plus employee organization. And he also founded Trilix, which is a business consulting and application firm, and held the position of Chief Managed Service Officer at Carousel Industries. Tim also just released a book on leadership titled The Intentional Leader that you can check out at Amazon or any bookstores, if those exist anymore. And Tim is also a great speaker on intentional leadership, culture, and change. And he has published work that has appeared on many media applications. So thank you so much, Tim, Dave, and Jim for joining us. And I am excited to get started.
Thank you, Rissa. I'm honored to be here today. You know, when you mentioned the book being available on Amazon, it makes you think about what was the world like 20, 25 years ago before Amazon, and think about how the impact of technology has changed the way we do every part of our lives. So it's amazing. It's a good time to be alive. You can go out and while you're on this call, do your one-click shopping, get your food brought in and have it delivered same day. So welcome, Jim and Dave. I'm really excited about this conversation. I know we've done a couple of prep calls and we've really spent some time talking through kind of how we want to change this narrative. What we've decided to do is not focus on the hardcore nuts and bolts of the technology, but the impact that cloud has on our business and how we need to start to think about interacting with this innovative technology. Some of us have probably on this call and have made a journey to the cloud, and maybe parts of our environments on the cloud, or we're using cloud-based applications. But I think most of us are just touching the tip of the iceberg with it. We haven't really adopted a cloud-first strategy. So we want to talk about how do we make that journey? How do we use cloud-based technology to actually create transformation within an organization? But before we jump into the Q&A portion, I just want to share a quick story with you. Back in 1991, I was contacted by one of our clients to come in and present to their executive team on this new thing that people were starting to talk about. It was called the internet. And I remember preparing my presentation, walking in. I walk into a room and there's 20 executives in the room, and I'm talking about the internet and the power of the internet and where it's going to go. Now, back then, the internet was really used as a vehicle to create email, maybe share some files, maybe go to a message board. It wasn't sexy. There were not a lot of site type of things that existed out there. So I talk about this, the internet, where it's going, the power, how I think it's going to be able to change and transform the world. I remember getting done with that presentation, and a couple of executives approached me, and they basically said, "There's no way in hell I'm ever going to put my company on the internet." And they started listing the reason why: security, protection of intellectual information, was a key, paramount in part of what they were doing. And what's funny is we wind the clock back 10 years ago, and we think about when cloud first started to appear in the market. I heard many people in the healthcare industry, the financial industry, talking about banking industry, talking about how they weren't going to trust their corporate assets to the cloud. It wasn't secure enough. Now we are today, and I think the world has changed. Everyone is moving to the cloud in some form or fashion. So I'd like to start talking about a little bit, and I'll start with Jim with this and just kind of start to see question. You've been in the healthcare space for a while. You've been working at a number of companies at the top senior level IT leadership role. And I think you've seen how cloud adoption has changed. So could you give us a little preview of what you see happening in this space?
Sure. The fact of the matter is that our users, whether it be our employees, our patients, businesses that we partner with, there's an expectation of access. And so it's kind of information all the time, every time, anywhere, anytime, is the expectation. And so the application designs have moved, in that direction. And so whether or not an organization has adopted a cloud-first strategy, the systems that we're using are kind of dragging us in that direction, whether we're going along willingly with a plan, or if we're just kind of, tackling the fire of the day as these things kind of crop up. But because of the design of applications and data being more mobile and portable, cloud architecture infrastructure actually supports that in the most efficient way. And so all of those objections that you heard from those executives 10 years ago have been flipped and are now the requirements for the applications that they're trying to serve to their constituents with inside and outside of the business. Yeah. So I really think that I think there's a term that we've used a couple of times as we've been talking about this, is that the cloud or the cloud environment is inevitable. Things are moving in that direction. Even if your intent is to have an on-prem data structure or infrastructure, you're going to have to mirror cloud services in order to be able to support the applications that you're going to be deploying. So I see it as a major move in the marketplace. I tie it back to the day that Netscape launched. If you go back to your original 1991, is that if you did not have a visual internet strategy and saw yourself as a technology company, that was a very alarming day for you when the companies that did have that presence shot to the top and really ultimately started the .com era. So, having a plan, knowing that this is coming, and being able to, meet that business-driven change with a strategy is going to be key to success.
Yeah, Jim, just to build on that, it's kind of funny with technology today. You think of the last decade, the end user, our parents, our grandparents, our kids, they're on the cloud all day long. They use the cloud more than sometimes some organizations are actually using it. So it's amazing how this shift in fundamental technology, where IT was once the domain of people like me, the geeks in high school and the geeks in college, right, that had all the knowledge. Nowadays, people are using the technology seamlessly on the cloud day in and day out, and we don't even think about it. So Dave, kind of, taking what Jim said, what would you add to that? What's missing in kind of how we think about the cloud a little bit today?
Well, I think Jim, you gave us a good perspective and kind of took us on a journey on the Netscape. And Tim, like you mentioned about the objections that were there before, the trust in cloud, security, data security was a big concern. A lot of IT administrators that I heard, didn't want to let go their job security in many ways. So there's this kind of fear of unknown, but fear of not changing things.
Yeah.
And there were real problems back then also around your carrier services. Your internet was not as reliable. You had the applications were too fat in some cases. They can't run. I think the whole, I would say the whole ecosystem is now circling and doing the kumbaya around cloud. Right? So you have to almost be part of that culture, be part of that change, and kind of, have a cloud first strategy in some way for you to not be left behind, right? So, if you try to do integration, application integration, or some things, you will kind of feel disconnected or have multiple applications to just left with a lot of integration work if you don't have a cloud first strategy at the end.
Well, if we use the internet evolution of the internet and the .com space, right, it became at one point in time in the 90s that it was the forward-leaning, forward-thinking companies, the early adopters, the innovators that were moving to the internet, setting up these presence. And many times they were mocked or they're made fun of by their brick and mortar counterparts, right? And now, if you look at it, you can't be a successful business if you don't have a digital presence, right? And that there was a point in time where it shifted from this kind of moving slowly towards it to where everybody had to have it. And it happened really fast. I kind of feel we're at that point with the cloud, where I can't ignore it any longer. My users within the organization, as Jim said, the patients that we're using are expecting that they can access everything from their phone, which means that we have to have more versatility and agility with our data and how we actually present it to the organizations. Many of our providers that that we're using, whether it's a healthcare application organization or some kind of Internet of Things that's monitoring devices or something like that for the healthcare environment, they're all moving towards the cloud at an accelerated rate. And what we're finding, the cost of moving to the cloud is becoming a lot less expensive too, right? So the cost is making it cheaper to move, even though it's not really a cost play, but cost makes it affordable. You go back 5-10 years ago, internet wasn't reliable. It was also a lot more expensive to get gigabit. And now you can get gigabit in the home for a reasonable price. So as we think about this, and we see the cloud, what do you think the biggest shift in the mindsets that's happened with the cloud with people that are making the migration? Do we think it's gotten more stable, more faster, more secure? I mean, where do we see with that? What's the maturity level of cloud in itself? So Jim, what do you think? Where do we stand with the maturity of cloud in general?
I would say that over the course of probably the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a real significant hockey stick in the maturity of the cloud. And I really think a lot of that comes from the very largest players in the space maturing their cloud-based products. So I'm talking about Microsoft with Office 365. I'm talking about Google with G Suite. They had to make their applications and their underlying infrastructure a lot more mature to be able to deploy that in a safe, secure fashion and be able to support your finance and your healthcare clients and be able to enter into HIPAA agreements and business associate agreements and things like that. So I think we saw that maturity start at the top and then trickle its way down. Amazon has really, in my opinion, always been kind of the leader with trying to roll out new, more mature products that can be self-service, in a lot of ways. And no different there. They've been on that same maturation process, even though they don't. Obviously, their core product that they're delivering is, of course, the storefront for the parent company. But they've also hosted things like, you may not even know, like Netflix was hosted on Amazon Web Services. So there's a direct competitor that they're hosting the services because they had the better solution for it in the cloud. So I do think that it's very mature. We've seen a lot more players enter the marketplace. So your traditional regional data centers where you could rent rack space and have a modified or a hybrid kind of on-prem, off-prem scenario, they've entered into the cloud space because that's where the infrastructure design is going. And the one key thing that I would add is that as you look at the hardware providers, if you're still looking at on-prem, they are producing things that are really supporting cloud, at least integration, if not mirroring cloud design. And so your traditional on-prem infrastructure is going to go up in price because it's going to be less available. People aren't going to stock an inventory like they did before, and it's all going to be custom ordered equipment. And so I think that the cost shift is there, and it will eventually become a cost play. Even though, to your point now, I've not seen a cloud migration that demonstrated significant cost savings. It shifts costs from capital to operational, but not really. It kind of nets out at zero.
Yeah, it definitely, there's not a true cost savings per se, but it definitely does make the way we think about cloud different. Instead of having to put a lot of capital budget out there, we can actually put this in more operational budgets, consume it as we need it.
And the second thing that I wanted to point out there is that our application providers. So I pointed out Office 365 and G Suite, but there's also the EMR practice management vendors in the healthcare space. They're all offering some as a service. So even if you don't have a direct cloud strategy, if you're signing up for these services, you are operating part of your business in a cloud environment. And in many ways, especially when you get into practice management and EMR, if you're operating in your vendor's cloud environment, that can be pretty restrictive. And so there is opportunity now to be one of those, I'm not going to say early adopters, but the earlier that you can adopt it, the better that you are positioned to not get painted into a corner by one of your vendors because they move into a a particular cloud strategy or a cloud technology that doesn't allow for integration, kind of locks you into their ecosystem, much like what we see with the big players. It's not like you can have, exchange email, but I want, Google Docs for my, no one signs up for both. You kind of get into one ecosystem or the other. And we're seeing more and more of that with, some of the primary technology vendors. And in healthcare, there's so much innovation going on and so many new products coming down the line that can really, limit your ability to grow your business or sustain your business. And the example I would use is that we moved into a practice management EMR solution in the cloud, and then found that we needed a scheduling module to run on top of it because the core scheduling module wasn't sufficient, and we couldn't do it because we were in the vendor's cloud and they wouldn't allow that level of integration. And so one of my first big private practice cloud migrations was based on that interoperability presented by the vendor. So that's the other component to it when you're kind of considering what is the cloud, is it's not just your core data components, but it's also the applications that your vendors are trying to sell you as a subscription model.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think one of the things that's interesting about the whole migration that's happening today is that for a while, most vendors were taking their on-premise application, putting it on some servers in the internet, someplace in the inner space kind of place, and they presented it in some kind of virtual kind of manner. But it was the same application just running and just delivered in that fashion. I think the point you're getting to, Jim, is that most of the providers of applications now are writing cloud native applications. They're building them in the cloud. And I think, David, we talked about in one of our planning sessions, this kind of born in the cloud kind of mindset. And I think what you're going to see is that this born in the cloud strategy is going to allow for faster deployment of technology. It's going to create an increased, if it's really adopted correctly, the interoperability, so I can do a plug and play with different parts of the solution as we needed. Am I getting that correct, Dave, from our conversations before? Or am I missing something there?
Yeah, I think you're kind of talking about the same thing. So what happened in the course of, I would say, in the last 5 years, the maturity and the call for action that, hey, the previous world where, like you said, the application that were on-prem, the EMR provider just said, hey, we're going to put this in the cloud. Now, it's a normal healthcare organization, that's one of many applications still is on-prem that still needs to be consolidated. What I see now is a lot of the EMRs kind of are cloud first focused with a lot deeper integration through API that allows you to interact with other cloud applications, that would kind of plug into the, scheduling and all that, right? And RBI, collect data warehouse, and, do all kinds of very important things to run a business. It's all happening, right? So the API is, a normal conversation now that you can actually have it in an EMR vendor. Before it was on HL7, the custom integration takes 6 months. So there's a shift in helping supporting this cloud first strategy across the board. Yeah.
So if I'm in the healthcare industry and I'm looking at upgrading my applications, whichever one it happens to be, it sounds like what I should be doing is having a healthy, what is the providers, the vendors cloud strategy, right? And where do they see it going? Where are they today? Where do they see it going over the next 3 to 5 years? Is that kind of a good first step, Dave, do you think, when you're looking at having those conversations?
Yeah. I mean, having this strategy or the vision that, hey, cloud's here to stay. It's going to help us make more efficient. It's going to help us see the business better. Just considering it's more like a GPS, right? You're driving this car as a medical practice, and this upgraded GPS is going to help you get there with live data and navigation, all those very important things through the journey of that, reaching to another, to your destination. Yes, absolutely. One of the things that should keep in mind to start thinking towards is, what is that big 5-year goal or strategy looks like, and then, tying that up with, a 1-year objective or something that kind of builds a roadmap for success.
No, I think that's a great point though, right? So, the cloud can be confusing. And part of the reason why we want to talk about seeing through the clouds is the fact there's a lot of moving parts. It's an evolving, maturing space. Everybody has a different take on it. And I think right now, today, we're not in this world where it's a pure play cloud environment, right? There's a combination of on-prem equipment that we have private cloud, public cloud, we have all kinds of things. And a solution is kind of a mix of those. So it's a little bit cloudy. So for us, it's really about kind of looking forward and trying to build a roadmap to understand where we are and where we want to go. And as the pieces evolve, we adjust that roadmap to add the clarity that we need to be able to create the right solution. To that end, I think one of the things that we want to look at, just like at some point in time back in the internet days, you couldn't bury your head in the sand and just ignore what was happening. You couldn't stay with your on-prem equipment. You couldn't stay just buying, you can't just stay buying more servers and, the classic applications. So there's drivers that are moving us forward. And we talked about a couple of them already. One of them is that we talked about the end user, right? Whether it's our employee or our patients in this case, that are driving us to provide different sets of services that we have never been able to offer before. Telemedicine being one of those factors, and the cloud makes that enablement of those services better. The second we heard is our vendors, our suppliers, the ones that were using their tools. They're moving to the clouds, and naturally, as they move to the cloud, we're going to be moving to the cloud. So what else besides those kind of things are actually driving us to more of a cloud solution? So I'll open this up, Jim. What do you think? What's a couple of things that are driving us to the cloud?
Well, I do think that interoperability. I mean, we talked a little bit about the applications themselves, but even if you have a application that you feel is robust enough to run your business, and you're utilizing all those modules in a single ecosystem, along comes the payer, so an insurance company, whether it be CMS or whatever, and being able to look up eligibility, being able to transfer claims electronically, being able to do all those types of things. And so even if you have the application, trying to get it connected to another business partner in an aligned fashion can be a struggle. If you have cloud enablement in that ecosystem, it can be a little bit easier, because you're going to find a lot of those business partners are in the same cloud ecosystem, and it actually makes those connections much easier than what it would be in an on-prem or even a hybrid solution.
So Jim, let me just kind of pause here for a second, just kind of ask this question. If you think about going back 5, 10, 15 years ago, you made an investment in a platform. And that platform was trying to be this monolithic, be everything to everybody solution set. And so they had all these modules or features that they would enable and roll out. And part of what happened in that world is that we spent a lot of time waiting for that vendor supplier to add that next feature that we needed. Mm-hmm. And I think what I heard you say, that one of the drivers that allows us to be more competitive and to be able to move faster as the market shifts, because we could be able to bring in a feature like you did. I have my main application is driving anything, but I can bring in a feature that they don't have yet, or it's not adequate enough for my business, and I can integrate that in. So interoperability allows me to be able to shift the market faster. Is that?
Yeah, you use the word agile, and that's what it's about. It's about agility.
Okay.
The example that I gave, that scheduling system, 2 years later, the core vendor improved their scheduling system because we were not unique in our abandonment of theirs. And we were able to flip that switch and move back to the core vendor and save that extra money because it was, of course, more cost efficient. But until the product met the business needs, we had to have an alternative solution. And we were agile enough to flip that switch on and then flip it back off after 24 months.
And so you got 2 years of innovation and the efficiency that brought on board. So Dave, besides the interoperability and the some of the other factors we've talked about. What else do you think is driving us to really start to think about our organization as a cloud first organization?
Well, so, I do have a, kind of a luxury of sitting in multiple healthcare organizations as a CIO. And some of the things that I'm hearing now is, hey, we have such a high no-show rate. How can technology help, right? Hey, we have a very high patient responsibility that we've sent all the statements, but we're not collecting, right? And I'm hearing all these unique things on one side of the, one of the businesses, and I'm, kind of driving another healthcare organization from a CIO perspective, where we are in the process of implementing some of those, where, just like what Jim mentioned, right? The scheduling system, right? The old traditional ways, you pick up the phone, call the patient 2 days before for a reminder, or a day before, and if they say yes, I'll still make it. Versus now, it's somewhere in the last 10 years, we started making automated robotic calls. But now nobody answers calls because every call could be a potential spammer, right? So, the next wave of innovation, or the ability to kind of innovate faster, is becomes SMS, text messaging, right? That, hey, you've got an appointment, yes or accept or no, and then a patient survey, a patient reminder on their patient balance with a little QR code, or like a tiny URL that they can click, and then to pay through Apple immediately, right? So we've seen this enormous amount of financial recovery or benefits that a practice is gaining just by integrating their EMR with this best-in-class scheduling, accounting, patient engagement system. So, and that's kind of, those are the challenges that can be easily solved when you kind of have a cloud first strategy, and you start looking at the data, and then, leverage, the data to then, solve the business problems.
Yeah, so I like that, Dave, and I'm just gonna kind of spin it a little bit differently, and just let me know if I'm on target here. So I think number one, when we look at this, is that in the past we had all these systems and they were siloed, and they sat on servers. They were not physically connected. Really, there was a LAN connection or something that connected them, but the data with those applications were in their own little siloed database. And what I'm hearing now, as we go to this interoperability, we start connecting these systems, my data now becomes more accessible as a ubiquitous one solid kind of place where I can now start looking at data from a different perspective, which means I can make better decisions. I can analyze the data. I can make better insights. I can look at things that I may not have been able to look at. Maybe it changes the way we do treatments. Maybe it's the way we improve chronic care down the road. Maybe we actually helps accelerate the shift to value-based care as we move, right? So it changes that nature because I'm looking at data holistically instead of these little silos. Did I hear that correctly as we're listening to that?
Yeah, and you're actually, more focused around your, you can achieve 80%, but then the last 20% of innovation becomes harder and harder.
Yes, exactly.
Our focus is not to focus on that 80, it's the 20. And as start asking questions, hey, how can this be solved by technology? Here's our no-show rate percentage of 25. What can we do to make this better from a technology perspective, right? Like using data to drive innovation, and using cloud to get more agile and more innovate faster, essentially.
Yeah, I love it. I think one of the things that I love about innovation is we think about innovation transformation in our practices in our healthcare centers, is that we have to ask better questions, right? Yep. If I have better data, I can ask better questions and do this. And just think about this. We've talked about Amazon today, and we never once mentioned purchasing a book on Amazon, which is how they started, right? They got to a point in time as they were getting more and more data, they started asking better questions. I'm doing well with selling books. How can I sell other things? I'm building this platform to sell other things. How can I leverage the investments I'm making to do other things? And now we're talking about them being the #1 cloud provider in the world, right? And it's through the series of questions that they're asking because they've been able to look at data in a different way. So one of the things I would look at, it just I take away as I'm hearing both Jim and Dave, you're talking about where you see the clouds. It seems like it shifts our mindset as leaders in our organizations. In the past, we spent times focusing on the problems, and we became problem solver mentalities. And it seems like what we're now shifting, that 20%, is more about the innovation. It's about more looking for solutions and opportunities. Do you think that's the reality of what's happening? Is that the organizations are more becoming opportunistic versus problem solvers?
Yeah, I mean, I take a first shot at it, and I'll let Jim. So, you know, 2.5, 3 years, right? A healthcare organization was forced to become work from home.
Yeah.
And part of, the need to still survive and still serve and still, take care of the patient one way or the other. And that now has created this kind of momentum, if you will, that, hey, technology does solve a lot of things. Change does happen quickly if we were to put time around it. And, we have now adapted this new way. The new way is that we can do a lot of things remotely. You can leverage cloud, and it has its levers around data and security. It does give you all the tools, the Swiss Army knife, if you will. So in my mind, the next 3 years is where if an organization starts putting their effort into, hey, in the last 3 years, this is where we kind of came from whatever the level was to the new way of conducting business. Hey, if we get intentional around this, so there's no external forces that tells us that we have to be work from home. What are the things that we need to do to be more agile and more innovative, right? And then a lot of things can fit in there, right? Clouds, it's a piece of it, but the strategy and the overall roadmap.
Yeah, I love it. So first of all, I love the word intentional. Anytime you use the word intentional, it wins brownie points for me, Dave. So that's good. So Jim, let's kind of switch a little bit for internal business drivers. So there's external things that are forcing us to the cloud and making it more convenient for us to go to the cloud. But there's reasons internally why we want to drive and move ourselves to the cloud. And what I heard, with Dave's, final comment there was this fact that we're able to switch on the dime to go from being everybody comes into an office, everyone, comes and sees a doctor in the office, in a visiting room. And literally overnight, because of the investments that we've made in the last few years, most organizations were able to switch, pivot, create a whole new way of doing business during some very difficult times. So I think we were talking in one of our planning sessions about the word of scalability. So kind of help me understand how scalability as a business driver internally is helping us move forward, how cloud impacts that.
So historically, scalability from an IT standpoint was always mapped out over the course of several years. So if you were buying storage or compute, disk space, laptops, whatever it was, you were kind of projecting how many you would need over time. And when it came to the on-prem data structure and infrastructure, you would buy in bulk with the expectation that that would carry you through the capital life cycle of the equipment. And that meant a big investment over time, and then the capitalization of that investment over a period of time. And in many cases, the estimates were wrong. Whether they were overshot, undershot, whatever the case may be, you always had some variable that wasn't clear at the time that the estimates were being made. And quite honestly, estimates over, a 5-year depreciation cycle for a server, that's a heavy lift to ask. So from a cloud perspective, scalability is close to instantaneously right now as it gets. In many cases, it does still take a little bit of planning because of the pricing and the way that those things are charged. You don't want to just turn on a server and say, if it ever maxes out, just make it bigger automatically. That's usually the most expensive way to deploy cloud. So I'm not going to say that there's an elimination of the planning step, but your ability to scale from both up and down is greatly improved. And so if there is a significant change in the business internal or external business needs, the cloud infrastructure can pivot and move with that very quickly. And I point the downside to it because that is really one of the big advantages. I mean, unless you were going to have, your own yard sale or something with on-prem infrastructure, the used market for that equipment was never great. Mostly terrible, hard to deal with. Removing your data, eliminating your data from the hardware that you were going to put on the secondary market, all really, really painful things for an IT leader. And it's about having the right advisors. And so I know that there are, some technology people on here, and it sounded like there were some, non-technology people on here. I think the term that we use was having aligned advisors, from that perspective. And that goes with capacity, strategy. The strategy still needs to be multi-year. A lot of small business IT strategies is 12 months at a time. That's not really adequate in this environment. And to your earlier point, I don't know that I agree with that we've gone from being problem solvers to innovators. I just think that the problems come much quicker now, and we have to solve them. The time to market expectations is much quicker, that it feels like we're being innovative, but in reality, we're just solving problems faster. And so I think having the right people involved with that. So if you don't have that person on staff, if there isn't a CIO or some other executive in the business platform, making sure that you don't have an unaligned vendor in the driver's seat for that plan and that strategy is important to making sure that those internal business drivers are being recognized and that the solutions to address them are being met.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point, right? I think the difference is today we have to be a lot more strategic in what we're doing. And so the days of where the value of IT is running IT, making sure it's up and running and that it's stable, is important, but it's less important than actually having the people set the direction of where we want to go. And what I would say is different from my perspective. Before, you had to do a lot of really, really detailed planning, design, architecture work. And you had to hope that you got it right, because you're making investments today that need to last you 3 or 5 years. What I'm seeing today that's different is I can actually look at an application. I don't have to make a multi-million-dollar investment to test it and do a proof of concept. I can go out and find an application that solves a very specific need. And I did this a while back with, expense management for travel expenses. Go out, buy one license, test it. I'm spending $20 a month while I'm doing my testing for 3 months. I prove that it works. I get the integrations working, and then boom, I light it up. And now I have the whole organization up and running in 2 months with no really heavy upfront in cost. But I knew I had to solve that problem. It just made it easier to get there. So this kind of rapid prototyping, proof of concept was a lot easier today than it was back. So I can be more responsive. I can react faster.
I can give you a real world example.
Okay.
So I have in my current organization, an application that's dependent on a SQL database. We implemented a change that, of course, in the test environment tested out fine. But once we got it up to production volume, there was a query that was extremely hardware, memory, and processor intensive. And had we been in a fixed environment, we would have had to roll that change back and brought back with it a whole bunch of stuff that we really needed.
Yeah.
Instead, we were able to add processors and memory to the SQL server, and the end users never really even knew that we had a problem. We ran that way for about a week. We fixed the code. We got it pushed back out, and no one was ever the wiser. And we did that with a few $100s worth of cloud resource consumption that would have cost the business thousands of dollars if we would have had to roll back.
Yeah, and then you would have had to still make the investment in the hardware design to beef up the processors, you fix the code. There's all kinds of stuff you had to do that would have taken time and moved your organization backwards. So one of the things that came up with this that I think is really key is the word strategy, right? And what I think we need to look at in organizations, that as we look at our IT staffing, we need to say, do we have the right staffing people that can bring strategy to the forefront of the conversation around IT? And traditionally in an IT infrastructure, that person is the CIO, CTO of the organization that kind of provides that. So Dave, today you play that role in a fractional level for a number of clients. They're small, they can't afford a full-time CIO. They don't have the need for a full-time CIO. So talk a little bit about the importance of having this kind of CIO at the top of the organization, and more importantly, finding ways to do it in a fractional environment if you're not large enough to make those investments today.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a broader topic, but I'll kind of summarize it. A lot of organizations that I get involved, they're very growth oriented. They're PE-backed organizations that have a hockey stick type of growth in their forecast. And I get called in to see the maturity level, the current operating maturity level of an organization, and see how that will adapt and grow and support this business growth, right? And the other spectrum, you have a bunch of engineers. They're very passionate about technology, but have very little awareness of how the business operates with the P&L statement, right? So you have these two unique minds that needs to be bridged with somebody who could say, this is required, we're going to do it in this phases, this is the trajectory, right? So helping an organization have a strategy, a blueprint, if you will, that as we grow, we will transform, and as we transform, it will support our growth and keep going, right? So I plugged right into those scenarios, and it's kind of a very interesting journey. Everyone's on a different path with a different level of skills. People, process, and technology is kind of the core focus on what I do, and developing a strategy, like Jim said, right? A lot of times, especially small or growing organizations, are so tactical. They're only focused on the now. I'll be happy if they have a one-year strategy, which you mentioned, right? Most majority of them would see it for 1 year. We need to help them zoom out and see the 3-year. And once you see that, you could start seeing a lot of things that could fail if we don't change the way we operate today. And that's kind of what I help build up on.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, and this is my general observation. When I see organizations that lack strategy, they have a tendency of viewing IT and technology as a necessary evil and as a cost center, right? And their whole focus is, how do I cut cost? And organizations that have more of a strategic approach to it seem to look at this as one of their strongest assets, and they figure out how they actually use that access to drive the business outcomes that they're looking for. I know, Jim, in your environment, you've been doing this for many, many years, where you've been able to help companies make that shift. Oops, I think we just lost Jim. So Dave, we can talk about this. Do you think that that's a correct assessment, that we have the ability to kind of switch the way we think about technology and IT investments from a cost center to more of an asset to the organization?
Yeah, I mean, IT definitely drives, has been driving a lot of businesses, and it is the most important catalyst to, how people communicate and how people do their day-to-day jobs, right? So it is, and there is a mind shift. I see leaders who knows that, hey, IT is an investment, and they do see that clearly, and some, just takes, depending on where they are on their growth journey, it takes them a little bit to understand that. And the CapEx model, which was always kind of unpredictable, and which created a lot of bad taste in the, for CFOs and, executives, because it will just come out of nowhere and it will be 6-figure oops. A lot of times for larger organizations, that, hey, we didn't plan for this, but hey, we need to drop in this, this OpEx model, that's everything as a service, more of a consumption model. Really, it's kind of what solves the big problem around adapting technology.
Well, it evens out my investment over time in a more consumable chunk than what we are doing today. So why don't we kind of start to wind this down and just kind of do a real recap. And as I was listening to you guys talk, I think there are like 3 main bullet points I'd like to have people be able to walk away thinking about. And I want to start with the the first one where, and I think Jim, you mentioned this in the conversation when we had, is that the cloud is inevitable. The cloud is happening. We are moving to the cloud. There's no stopping. There's no going back. That it's kind of like working from home, the remote worker from home kind of environment. It's not going back in the bottle. It may not be as open as it was during COVID, but people are going to expect to be able to work from home, have more flexible schedules. It's not going to change and go back to where everyone drives in every single day for every hour of every day. And I think cloud's the same way. And we see it, it's moving, and we have a choice to make as leaders, especially in IT leaders, is how well we embrace that. And how do we make our strategy as a business and as an IT leader wrap around and become very, very connected to the cloud first kind of mentality. The second thing that I heard is that there are many drivers that are forcing us to look at cloud and look at cloud seriously. There are external drivers and internal drivers. Some of the internal drivers are, the need to have more agility and to be able to scale the organization faster. It's kind of funny when we looked at security, we thought at one point in time, keeping everything in our data center and our locked room in our building was the most secure way. But I think most people are finding moving to the cloud is actually more secure, because you have companies like Amazon and Microsoft and Google invest in billions of dollars in improving security. So we're seeing that change as time goes on. So we need to make better choices about how we implement cloud and move forward. And by using cloud first strategies, our number of opportunities and choices increases drastically. I don't have to wait for one vendor to solve all my needs. I can bring in other solutions like Jim demonstrated in kind of his conversation. Then the last is that we need to have a plan. We need to have a roadmap. If we want to navigate through the cloud successfully, we need to have a plan. We need to look longer than that 1 year window. We need to be looking 3 to 5 years out and see where the business wants to go and how that IT technology roadmap can actually help make that happen. Then it sounds like the last thing that we want to look at as we navigate this, we really want to look at the people in our teams that are helping us drive that migration to the cloud. And we need to have people that are more strategic, that can have one foot firmly planted in the technology side of it, but the other side firmly planted in the business world. And I don't think so much that it's about alignment of technology and business. I think it's the fusing of technology and business, where those two become so inseparable, they're in lockstep as they're moving forward. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the controls back over to Rissa, who will take us home.
Yes,
Welcome
thank you so much, guys. This is a great conversation. So I really appreciate it. And let's get into some of these questions. So if you're watching and still here, this is a good time to pop your questions into the Q&A. And before we get going on the questions, I just want to remind everyone to save the date for our next webinar, which will be October 27th, right before Halloween. And it's going to be about the top 3 trends in cybersecurity, how to leverage technologies to enhance your organization's preparedness. So please make sure you mark your calendars October 27th and tell everyone, and let's get into these questions. So here's a good one for Dave. How can a growing organization adopt the cloud?
Well, that's a great question. I think I talked through a little bit of that before, but what I would start off with is just be intentional, right? Have a strategy and ask the question around, do we have the right people in the right seat helping build a strategy, right? And if you don't, rely or reach out to vendors, the SMEs, the subject matter experts in certain areas, to really help build a plan, right? So once you have a plan, things becomes easier. So I had this, mantra that I always follow, right? Make the plan, then rework the plan, and then the plan will work for you at the end.
Yeah, I like that. I
love that.
Simple and sweet, right?
All right, here's another one. What are the biggest issues my practice might run into when trying to transition to the cloud?
Mm-hmm.
So I would answer that by saying that it's just different. So I think they're the same issues, but they are in a slightly different context. And so when you look at security, cost, whatever the category of IT is, all of the problems are the same. It's just that they are in a slightly different context. And so it goes back to having the right people in the room when you're looking at those challenges, to make sure that they understand not only the problem, but the context of it as it relates to cloud. The good news is that, you know, when you're subscribing to a cloud service, whether it be Office 365, an ASP vendor, your own private cloud environment, managed cloud, whatever it is, you're bringing a lot of expertise to the table, and it's having the right people on your team to interface with that expertise.
The other thing too, I would add to this, Jim, I think there's a couple of things that we have to look at, right? As we make that migration to the cloud, our needs for access to the internet changes, right? Whether it's through, you know,
Sure.
someone working from home, someone working from the office, you know, so I think a lot of times when people start to make this migration, they underestimate the need of speed and bandwidth on the local sides. I've seen a lot of clients that make that, they're somewhat successful as they start deploying and rolling out. Then they have performance-based issues. And that can be easily resolved by putting the right technology in place, but that needs to move to the forefront of your planning. What do I need if I'm going to make that migration to the cloud? And now that people are working from home, you have to consider what that looks like at home as well. Sometimes
And that's
not enough.
That's a shift in mentality too, though, for the IT team, is that in a lot of cases, the initial design for a cloud environment or that start on the cloud journey is to still have a lot of traffic come back through the local sites that may or may not be necessary.
Yep.
And if you can actually get that traffic out of your environment and go from the cloud to the client, so if that's a patient, the patient on their cell phone is going directly to your cloud environment, you can eliminate some of that traffic off of your local network.
Yep.
So again, they're the same types of, you know, things. It's just a different context in what you're looking at them and making sure that you're considering all of those aspects.
Love it. Love it.
Good. All right. Well, we're almost up to the hour point. So I have one last final question, because this was such a great conversation. But for the people watching, what should their first step be? What can they start to do today?
I'll
assess your
start.
current situation and your needs and establish the business drivers, and then look at cloud.
Yeah, exactly. I think so I'll add to that. I think it really is to shift from the tactical running of IT and the technology in the environment to really being strategic about it, making sure you have the right people at the table to have those conversations with you, whether you hire someone, bring them in, or you as a full-time employee, or you find some expert that can come in and sit at that seat that's a fractional, providing that guidance. I think the strategic portion is the part that's missing right now. Is why some clients are struggling to get maximizing the value that they're making today. Dave, what would you add?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is if you're kind of in the CEO or, you know, somebody who's in driving seat of the organization, I would urge them to kind of create a meeting that's more intentional around, hey, what is our plan, right? And go to that in-house CIO or CTO or an IT manager, or maybe you have an IT company now that you're working with, having a strategic conversation with them. Like, I would give those people this clarity that, hey, our organization could be an X revenue or an X employee now. It's going to be this Y revenue, Y employees in next 3 years, you know? And what do we need to change, pivot, or do to adapt and grow, right? And if you have audience around the IT leadership side, I would set up a meeting with your CFO or CEO and just ask them that question to get some clarity around that, and then get the conversation started to really go towards making a plan, right? That's more transformational and more strategic and more long-term.
You know, Dave, I think that's a good point too, right? It's hard to build a strategy if you don't know what the outcomes are that you want to achieve, right? So understanding the business outcomes and defining those and making it clear to the entire organization is really essential.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jim. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Tim. This was a great conversation. We will be sending out the recording this weekend, so feel free to share it with any of your colleagues that might need to hear a little bit more about cloud solutions. And of course, you're always welcome to call us at Medicus IT. We love having these high level strategic conversations. A lot of our clients come in for these transformational services. So even if you're using another IT provider, we'd still love to talk. So thank you guys so much again. I hope everyone has a good Thursday, and I look forward to seeing all of you back right before Halloween for our next webinar. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks, Tim. Dave.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.